meeting, I should say, of the Dallas-Fort Worth SharePoint and Office 365 user group. I am joined by my fellow hosts, Christopher Webb. Chris, wave to the crowd so they can see you. There he is.
Howdy,
Corey Roth. I'm not sure where Mr. McCollum is. I'm sure he's lurking about here somewhere or will be along shortly. And I don't think Jen can join us today, can she, Corey?
Nah, she's dealing with grandma. So.
Okay. All right. So we have a rogues gallery with the chief rogue, as it were. Mr. Schafline is here joining us, who will be doing our main presentation tonight. So if you thought we were curmudgeonly and hard to get along with, you haven't seen anything yet.
A couple people didn't get the memo on the flat hat, so I can see, right?
they didn't. So for those who aren't aware, I am broadcasting to you live from the United Kingdom, about 2 hours west of London. And so we thought, in the tradition of being here over in Old Blighty, that Paul and I would not only put on our English hats, but since we're the old guys in the room, we would just go ahead and look the part tonight.
And I'm drinking my tea.
And
you have a glass of whiskey, I assume, right?
I do not. I have water. It's terrible. Can't carry on this. So it's going to be a terrible show. All right. So first things first, as always, well, let me apologize for the technical difficulties. I have a bright spot here behind me, and so I'm a little bit dark, but you don't want to look at me anyway. Look at Paul and Chris and Corey. They're all better looking. Well, I don't know about Paul. That's questionable. Let's begin by thanking our sponsors, as always, because without them, we could not do this podcast. So I'd like to thank K2, our longest running sponsor of the user group. I'm not sure if they have joined us this week or not. I'm just scrolling down the list. I'm going to divert here because I see one of our longest attending members who's been missing for a while, Mr. Tom Phillips from Daystar, is here with us today. Tom, welcome back. It's been a long time since you were at a user group meeting, so glad you could make it this week. I also want to thank our actually UK sponsors here, Training Plus by Combined Knowledge, Sundown Solutions, who, like BinaryWave, is bi-continental, as it were, both in the States and here in the UK. We haven't heard from the other Chris Webb for a while. I hope he is doing well. Have any of you guys heard from Chris? No, nope. I haven't either. We'll have to wrangle that guy up. Also want to thank our gold sponsors, of course, TrippLite. Meetings just aren't the same without having Charlie in person at our meetings, but Charlie, you are represented here in the TrippLite brand, Ampio Solutions, Yash Technologies, and of course our good friends at SparkHound Solutions. So thank you all for sponsoring the user group. To our presenters, or our sponsors, I should say, if you have anything you would like to promote during the course of the webinar, please do let me know. Pop something into the chat window. We will make sure that we highlight that and that everyone is aware. And a quick shout out also to our sponsors, if they're listening. If you would like to send me, I'll show you a little pop-up we can do later with a promotion for our sponsors. If you'd like to send me something on that, we'll be happy to do it in the course of the meeting for you. Our video from last month is available. I have to apologize. We had some technical difficulties with that one, and the first little bit got cut off and didn't get recorded. It said it was recording, but it didn't get the first, 10 minutes or so. We tried to backfill on that on the back end. So a little bit choppy on that one, but it was an excellent presentation from Liam Cleary. So I hope you can go check that out. All of our videos will be available within a week or two after the original presentation. You can see them all at our channel there on Big Marker, which is DFW SharePoint and Office. Why it cut off the 5, I have no idea, but we're Office-36 on the channel, and we will post as well to the website.
That's all right, Eric. I know you purposely cut my section off.
I did, man.
Cool.
I did. I ditched that dash teams out of there entirely just for you.
All right, I got a whole bunch of teams coming for you.
I know you do. So you may have noticed on the slide deck that I've added our ugly mugs in the upper left-hand corner of the slides, or the upper right-hand corner there. That's because it's hard when we're on these web presentations to hand off things to each other. So if you see your face in the upper corner, you will know it is your turn to speak. And then when we get to Paul, we have a big thing for Paul's face, which I know everyone will appreciate. So be sure for our previous recordings to go to the communities. I do want to remind folks that jumping into the upcoming events, that we are planning to have one of our networking get-togethers this fall. I'm working with the sponsors on that. We promised you that. We will make it happen. We're trying to pull that together, and we are going to try and have our annual holiday party as well. Not sure if we'll have it at Microsoft or somewhere else, but stay tuned for that. So we are trying to have a couple of live events upcoming here in the fall and into the winter. Having said that, conference upcoming events. We have SP TechCon coming up in August 25th to the 28th in Boston, Massachusetts. That's sptechcon.com. I will be at that one, so please do come and say hi. And if you'd like to join me for about 3,000 calories of pure heart clenching, artery clogging, wonderful, delicious lobster, you can join me at the Somerset Shack across the street from the hotel. As Corey can testify, it's one of the best meals you will ever have.
It's excellent.
And if you buy me a lobster, I will answer all of your SharePoint questions. I do not promise that any of them will be factual. SP Fest, August 8th, August 19th through the 23rd in Seattle, Washington. Any of you guys going to SharePoint Fest? Paul, Corey, you guys do those? Yeah, that's not a show I normally do either, but that's coming up in Seattle. Of course, the big kahuna is Microsoft Ignite, November 4th through the 8th in Orlando, Florida. I think there are still tickets available. I can't be 100% positive on that. I think you can still register for that. Hotel choices might be a bit slim, so bring the Winnebago and plan on camping down at the KOA. You old people will get that reference. And then finally, Office and SharePoint Live is November 17th through the 22nd, Orlando, Florida. And you can go to notsharepointna.com. That is the wrong link. The correct link is Live360 or Office365Live.com. I need to fix that link. Inadvertent promotion for SharePoint North America, but that won't happen until next year in May. All right, and I am now going to flip it over to our newsmaster extraordinaire, Mr. Chris Webb.
All right, see, got lots of team stuff on here, but
See that.
really though, Teams has really been lashing and just releasing a whole lot of new stuff over the last few months. It's about time. I mean, they've been pretty much on just not releasing a lot of things over the last 6 months. It seems like real slow, but lately they've been posting a whole lot of stuff coming. So some of the things right now that went live recently that I can confirm are priority notifications, which are pretty much kind of like an urgent notification. It'll keep pinging somebody for 2 minutes, until they respond to it. So, or it's actually every 2 minutes for 20
Yeah, it
minutes.
sounds like a great thing to disable.
That's a nag feature.
Yeah, it can be abused, I'm sure, but it's there mainly for medical. That's where it started at for healthcare. So,
okay, I can see that. I guess.
Announcements are live, so you can basically what that is the announcement post type. So you go in, you create a new post, you can get a banner. It's kind of more in your face, a type of chat in a team chat. So it's kind of similar to like a SharePoint news page, but it just goes right there in the chat with the banner and everything. They've also could put the meeting bar. It used to all be on the top right. It's all in the center now. That's now live. So you got one single bar across the middle of your screen when you join a meeting to do all your meeting controls, mutes, all that stuff. Some of the pending stuff that's really big, native federation, I'm waiting for that one. So you can have external chats with people outside of your organization. You can get the full GIF, screenshots, likes, everything instead of just simple chat. Read receipts are coming soon. They announced like a new cross-channel posting that's supposed to be, they delayed it a little bit. It's supposed to be this month, but I guess they pushed it out a little bit. But you can basically post to multiple channels at once.
How does that work? Do you when you create a new one, do you pick the channels that you're posting to, or how does that go down?
Yeah, I've kind of seen it where you have a message. There's an option at the top to say post to multiple channels, and you type your message, and then there's like a selection box where you can select multiple channels from multiple teams, and it'll post that message out. The files tab in SharePoint, I put this year ? Because it's literally seems like it's delayed with no end in sight for I don't know how long now. It's supposed to have been out last Ignite at the end of the year. It was supposed to have been out at SBC, and it's still not here, and they haven't said anything. And it keeps showing up in demos, but no telling when that comes out. But we're waiting on it. App mentionless mentions. That's came in the message center. Something about where you don't have to type app mention. If you type someone's name, it'll pick it up as somebody you would want to mention. You can click it to convert it to a mention. Real-time presence. They're supposed to be making presence a lot better. Right now, you look at your presence list and it's behind until you click on them or start chatting with them. Then it decides to update. They're supposed to be fixing that towards near real time. So wait on that one. Private team discovery. We've talked about that before. It's where you can search for private teams if you allow it. Calendar app. At this point, I put vaporware. Haven't heard anything about it. They announced it in the message center. It's gone MIA. Haven't heard anything about it. Don't know what's going on with that. So. Not sure. Roadmap, they announced targeted messages in one of the recent blog posts. And this is kind of interesting because it's similar to mentions, but it's more towards like groups of people. You can set up tags. So you can say everybody from this office, and you can tag that office, and anybody in that team from that office will get a mention instead of that whole team or that channel. So you can kind of segment your mentions out a little bit better based on different definitions. I don't know. It's still early, but that's what I've heard of that and what it said in the blog. So it's pretty interesting. They're doing some API with busy lights and stuff that they've made available or going to be soon. Paul, you may know more about that. I'm not sure, but that's kind of lit up on the roadmap. And then pop-out chats, that's a big one everybody's waiting for, especially from the Skype world. If they get that launched, I think a lot of people will start moving from Skype over, be less reluctant. SharePoint pinning releases, team connected folder icons. So basically, if your SharePoint site is connected to Teams, any team channel folders should have an icon on them. They said it was supposed to already be rolling out. I haven't seen it yet, but it should be soon. Vertical sections are supposed to be set up horizontal sections on all your SharePoint pages. You're supposed to have ones where you can go vertical now. So they announced those are going to be rolling out soon. And OneDrive, you can now set passwords on anonymous links. And I just saw the other day KFM known folder move. I don't remember what it stands for, but basically you can set your documents, the desktop picture folders automatically in OneDrive. They got an Intune ADMX for it now, so it makes it super easy if you have Intune to configure those automatically when you roll out computers with Intune. So that's about what all I got. So
Cool.
Any questions, put them in QA and I'll get to those.
Yeah, so thank you for mentioning that. And forgive me for sort of looking off to the side over here. I'm adding all the social stuff, putting us on Twitter and Facebook and whatnot. If you have questions during the course of the presentation, and these can be any questions related to Office 365, SharePoint, definitely questions for the presenter and the topic that he's on, post them into the chat. If they're for the presenter, we will proctor those and I'll pass those along to Paul at various points in the presentation. And if there are other things that we can answer, we have your crew here to respond to those for you. So please feel free to put those in there. That's what they're for. If you would like to get the slide deck from our little intro here, you can go to the handouts section. It's already been posted there, so you can download that. It has some of the links and things that we'll be talking about throughout this intro bit here. And then if there's anything else that Paul wants to post, he can post that in there as well. So I thought, since this is a developer-focused podcast webcast, which is one of the nice things about this format, is that we can bring you some content that's more technically focused than we could do in the in-person format. I thought I'd share some developer news. So these are just some things I cribbed real quick. Corey, you may have some input on some of these pieces here, but I just hopped out to the Office developer blog, and a few things that jumped up. First and foremost, there's some new OneDrive community samples out there. The OneDrive code repositories and walkthroughs and demo code has been really, really lacking over the last few years. They're making a concerted effort with a new GitHub repo to correct that. So you can see it there, github.com OneDrive. You can go there and grab some community samples, very much along the lines of the PNP type of process. Also, if you've built something cool and you think you deserve an award for it, you can go submit at the Microsoft 365 App Awards and put information in, nominate your app or somebody else's app for those awards. And then in the SharePoint space, there's a new version of CSOM released in June. It was actually just some small updates, so it wasn't anything major, but there's a couple of new PowerShell commands in there that you may want to check out. I don't know that a lot of our developers are aware of this, so two things I wanted to point out here. One, there's a P&P, a Patterns and Practices community call every month that's open to the entire public. So if you want to join on that call, you can go, there's the latest recording, you can sign up for that community call and you can get involved. And then there's one for SharePoint Framework as well, led by Vesa and Team. Actually, I think both of those are Vesa and Team. He pops in and out between them. And so go to developer.microsoft.com for the SPFX community call. Again, that's also open to the public, and they talk about new things that have been released and bugs and issues and challenges and whatnot. So those are pretty good calls, and they're not limited to just folks who are, say, MVPs or in the official developer channels. Anybody can participate in those. If you want these links, grab the slide deck from the handouts. URLs are in there. And with all that set aside, we're going to move on momentarily to our featured presentation from my elder partner in crime, Mr. Schäflein.
Yeah, wait a minute.
So for those of you who were at SharePoint conference, there's a little backstory here. Paul and I played the inimitable Statler and Waldorf to our audience, of which there were too many young people and only a few of us old folks got it. But in any event, that's where that reference comes from. So he's Waldorf, I'm Statler, and we're basically the old guys screaming at these kids to get off our lawn. But today, actually, Paul is going to share some new and exciting stuff that the young kids will be into. And so he's going to jump into that momentarily. Before I turn it over to Paul, just a couple of reminders. I mentioned already, if you have questions, please do put them into the chat window. We'll probably go a little long over the hour mark. I've told Paul to take as much time as he needs. He's got a bunch of demos and some pretty cool stuff in here, so I hope you can hang around for that. We're going to try and target these in the future between an hour and a half, just to give us time to run through everything for our presenters. I hope that's okay with everyone, and certainly give us some feedback if you think that's a little too long, or you think that's a little too short and we could go longer. As always, head to dfwsharepoint.com for the latest announcements on special events that are upcoming and our next webcasts. You should be familiar now with our schedule of every third Tuesday, round about the same time. I'll be posting a poll here shortly as Paul is going through his presentation about what time you would like for future events. We promise folks that we would adjust that if necessary. So I'll be putting out a poll here in a little bit. All right, so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Schäflein. Paul, who probably needs no introduction, but I'll let him introduce himself. It's all yours, my friend.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's a little sad not to be in person. I enjoy my trips down to Dallas, but maybe when it's cooler. But anyways, I'm glad to be here, everyone. And so we'll try to get through the slide deck. Here we go. All right. So first of all, the obligatory slides. The boss would yell at me if I didn't get their logo in here. My name is Paul Schäflein. I work at Admin 365, which is ISV in the UK. Eric could probably wave hi. I also do a podcast every week with Jeremy Thake from Microsoft. We do the Microsoft 365 Developer Podcast. So if you want to get some more news other than the stuff that Chris shared earlier, we cover that every week. We find guests periodically. Both Corey and Eric have been on the show, so find them and download their episodes. That was great stuff. And then here's again the obligatory slide on the company. You can all read that later. We're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about Microsoft Teams. And so what I have what I've got here is a bunch of slide decks all meshed together to talk about developing for Microsoft Teams. And now I know this is a big question, and so I'm going to open up a link here. If you can spell my last name, Schäflein.net will get you to my blog. I just posted a resources page up here, and again, I'll have a link to this later I cover a lot of stuff here. I flip around like crazy, and you'll want to know, where do I find all that stuff? And so here's a page I put together with all those links. Again, at the end of the slide deck during Q&A, I'll put that link up on the screen so you can see that and get that information. Right. The first thing that I want to talk about here is, well, so before I go too far, this you'll notice is the look and feel in this is a Microsoft slide. This content was originally prepared for the Office Developer Marketing Group. So at github.com/officedev is a training repository. There's a team section. There's 5 modules in there. I pick and choose some basic stuff here. This is mostly module 4 that gets in there. So lots of information that you can get in here. It's been updated every quarter. Teams is a little odd because the bot framework just had a big release back at Build, and they haven't paid anyone to update this material yet. So it's not latest and greatest from bot framework version 4.5, but the concepts all still apply. So we'll go from there. All right. So with introductory stuff out of the way, let's talk about a Teams application. And what is a Teams application? Right? So we'll cover what they are. How do I create one? What do I do with it? Right? And so Teams extensibility options. According to Microsoft, you have 2 choices. You can build a Teams app, or you can build a custom bot. Don't build a custom bot. It's not going to be helpful. Now, the idea around this, of course, is if you have a bot already because you're doing interactions with Facebook or Slack or whatever, and you want to bring that same bot capability to Teams, that's an option as well. But the most productive use of Teams that I'm seeing is if you actually build a Teams application and do all the pieces that we'll talk about this morning or this afternoon, and with bundling that all together, you get a nice solution for your users. So we want to build a Microsoft Teams app. A Teams app has tabs. It has bots, it has messaging extensions, and it has connectors. Those are your big things. Right now, as we talked in the news, there was talk about how there's a scheduling app, or the shifts app, or the calendar app. There's lots of things coming from Microsoft, but at its core, this is what we're looking at here. And these are the things that our users are going to be interacting with. Right? But again, taking a step back, this is what I like to call a bunch of services, right? So Microsoft Teams provides this tab service. The tab service is really an iframe into some web page that you have. So you can write a web page, you can expose it as a tab. Life is good. Everything's great. Now, it may not be productive, it may not be useful to people, but at least there's something there. It has an interface to the bot service. The bot service is the Azure bot service, can be surfaced into Teams, and that provides the chat experience that people are most familiar with. And again, messaging extensions and connectors, which kind of extend the bot paradigm, if you will, a little bit to provide some automation, and we'll cover a little bit more on those. All these services are in a scope, right? And there's 2 primary scopes. One is a personal scope, which is one-to-one. I can do a one-to-one chat with me and one other person. An app can be exposed in this chat interface, either as a tab, what they call a static tab, or a bot doing a one-to-one conversation. There's also a little flavor of personal, which is a group chat. Doesn't work all that great, and I don't know how many useful cases we have in there, but the idea, of course, is that I have a chat with a bunch of humans, and the bot maybe want to interact with them or have a tab exposed as part of that group chat, where group chats really are a stepchild, if you will, of the team or the channel scope, really. So that typically a group chat is ad hoc, whereas a team or a channel is more formalized. You have a list of people who are in a team, and they're going to be doing a chat. So again, we don't cover group chat too much because it's kind of it's the same code as personal scope, but how it used is a little bit different. So when you're writing this Microsoft Teams app and you're writing a component or a service that's going to be part of a Teams app, you need to decide where will it be exposed. Will it be exposed as part of the personal scope and or the team scope? It can be both, up to you. And then after that is built, you have to do the same thing that we've always done in SharePoint. You need to package and deploy this thing, right? So similar to SharePoint framework stuff, where you need to build an app package and provide that to SharePoint in the app catalog, you have to build a Teams app package and provide that to Teams in the Teams app catalog. Same kind of thing. I can upload it to a single team or as many teams as I want, one-off. I can do what they call a tenant app catalog. And so we yelled about SharePoint. Give us the tenant-wide app catalog. It took a long time for that to happen, and they finally got there, right? Well, Teams came out with it right away. Excellent, beautiful thing. So I can publish an application within an app catalog for my tenant. And if I'm an ISV and I want to publish my app throughout all of Office 365, I can publish it to the Microsoft Store. And as you would expect, if it's going to the Microsoft Store, you have all the typical validation that has to happen and so on. But
hey, Paul, just real quick,
yes.
we're not seeing your slides change. Are you transitioning slides?
I am.
No, he's good. He was just on that one slide. I'm seeing it. I mean,
yeah, I just switched it now. It says, why create a Teams app, immersive experience?
Oh, all right. If everyone else is seeing it, it's just me. Carry on.
Okay. And so this slide is pure marketing, but I included here just to give you a little exposure to what they're thinking, right? So Microsoft Teams provides what they're calling an immersive experience, right? I can have content and conversations happening, what they call side by side, which, but again, you've heard others in the community talk about this being a single pane of glass for Office 365 stuff, which I'm not wild about that term, but the idea makes sense. I have a chat conversation. I get a tab that is my files. Those are SharePoint files. I can have a tab that's a plan for this team that's actually talking to Microsoft Planner. And so you can imagine how if there's some line of business app or there's something or even a third software as a service that your group of humans are working with, you want to have that handy for folks. We can bring that into Microsoft Teams. And furthermore, what makes the most sense is if I have a tab which is showing a web page about some business app, and I need to have a conversation with someone about that, there's a button I can then open a chat window off on the right-hand side of the tab and have a conversation about what I'm seeing. So it brings these two together. And again, if your users want to do this thing, that why make it difficult? Let's make it all the same place. My favorite is the customizable cards. Adaptive cards are the bomb for me. Anyone who knows me knows that they don't give me 8 crayons. I only get 4, maybe 5 crayons to play with because of my skills. And so using the cards, I don't have to create something to make it look like Teams. I can provide a data payload to Microsoft Teams and they render the card for me. I don't go too deep into cards in this talk, but in that training content repo, there's a whole section on adaptive cards that you can look for. The bot framework is what we would use to do all the chat stuff. Again, you're not doing a Microsoft Teams thing when you're writing a bot. You're using the Azure bot service, using the bot framework, and then you connect that bot framework bot using the Teams channel. It's kind of an overloaded term because why not? We have Microsoft. We can use the same noun for many things. So I create a Teams channel inside my bot framework, and then I can have the chat thing work in there. As we heard during the news section, the ability will soon happen for me to bug you incessantly until you answer me if that's what I want, but Teams brings these notifications. It says instant notifications. I kind of push back on the word instant because the Teams notification is suboptimal in my opinion, but they're working on it, so we'll get there. But again, it's something else that Teams brings to the table for you. And then messaging extensions is the last pillar. Again, I'm going deep on the messaging extensions, but here's the idea. Let's say I have a work item in Azure DevOps and it's a bug and I need to chat with someone about this bug, right? A coworker about this bug. I can, rather than just say, hey, do you know that bug 123 that we had an issue with? I can do a messaging extension to actually search the bug list, get a card that represents that bug with the title and some other information about it, and insert that card into the conversation. I assume most of the younger folks in the room have used the messaging extension type before because that abomination that is Giphy is a messaging extension. I can then express my message using something. I'm extending the words with something else to do that. And so that's an option as well as to have the messaging extension. So those are all the things that end up in a Microsoft Teams app that I can then deploy. So how do I create one? What I'm going to do now is switch over to code, and we're going to create this. First, we're going to create one using Node, and then we'll go in and do some stuff in Visual Studio. So I'm going to launch a Node.js window here. This is just Node command prompt is downloaded from the internet. I'm at Node version 10 at the moment. I've also installed a Yeoman generator that was created by another MVP with Victor Villain. However, Victor's Yeoman generator is supported by the product group, so that's the thing that we're going to want to use. So let me just find my folder here. We're going to make a directory here called DFW. Oops. And we'll make another one here for our first tab. And then I'm going to do Yo Teams. And as I do Yo Teams, what you'll end up with is that all the choices that I can have for creating a the stuff we saw in the slide, right? So it's running. Trust me, it's running. Come on. Now I'm starting to wonder, maybe. All right. Typical Node stuff, right? It takes 20 minutes to do something. We used to do fast in Visual Studio, but that's a whole nother presentation Erica and I can do. So I've run Microsoft Yo Teams. It comes up with the Yeoman generator. And now the Yeoman generator says, welcome to the James, what is your solution name? And so we start out with, notice it's just got a name that based on the directory that I've done here, right? And so I'm going to rename this because I have steps that go through, and if I change the name, the steps won't work. And so I'm going to call mine Teams App 1. The Yeoman generator is going to what we call scaffold a project for me, and so it needs to create a bunch of files. Where do we want those files? We'll use the current folder. We want to give it a name. Your company name, as you'd expect, and then we have different versions of the manifest. And so we'll talk more about what this means, but I'm going to stick with the latest version there. And now you'll notice I have all these different choices for what is it I want to scaffold out. I'm going to just do a tab at the moment, but as you can see, all the options that are allowed will work there as well. Now we get into this next step where we need to understand a little bit about how a Teams app works. In this case, I'm creating a tab. Microsoft Teams shows a tab using an iframe. And an iframe needs to have a destination URL. And so I need to give it a URL. The Yeoman generator defaults to an Azure website. It doesn't have to be Azure. It can be anything you want. In fact, I'm going to run it locally and tunnel into my thing. So I'm going to leave that blank for now. We'll change it later. Demo code, so I don't need tests. I don't need app insights. Again, what do I want my tab to be called? We'll leave that's fine. The latest updates of the SharePoint framework let me copy things back and forth. I'm staying out of SharePoint world today, so we'll just say no, and it goes through, and boom, here we go. We now create, as you see here, a dozen and a half files that are at the actual Teams application, and then we go and download about 2/3 of the internet using Node. And so we'll let that run, and I'm going to open up the Visual Studio Code. Doesn't have to be code, but I'm using code because that's what kids use these days. And so I'm just going to open that folder that was just created. And so that's going to be my DFW folder. And let's look at the solution that's generated for us and review what we get and what we need to look at here. So there's a lot of files. Again, Node modules, we don't care about the Node modules folder. That's stuff that runs for Node. All we really would look at is the source. A couple things that might make sense. If you've done SharePoint work before, you have the same type of configuration with Webpack and a tsconfig and a gulp task to do that. You can look at the gulp file and extend it all you want. That's your typical Java or Node-based development using Webpack with gulp as a task runner. In the source folder, I have two subfolders. I'm going to start with the manifest. The manifest is just a JSON file that describes my Teams app. And what I end up telling Teams, this is the things that I have. So I start with this manifest. You'll notice it's got the version that we put in here, 1.4. And then some of the information I filled out in the Yeoman generator are put in here. But if you look further down, you'll start to see we have a section here called configurable tabs, and then static tabs and bots. These are the different things that Microsoft Teams allows, the services that I mentioned in the slide deck. A tab that's available in a channel scope is called a configurable tab because it lets you do some configuration of the tab relevant to the channel. A tab that's deployed in a one-on-one or a personal scope is called a static tab. It doesn't need configuration necessarily because it's one user. And again, when we fill out a bot, we fill in this information. So that's all I care about right now. Notice there's an icon section here that points to files, 2 different files. Those files are also in the manifest folder. And that's there.
Paul, I'm going to interrupt you real quick. I've got a couple more people here saying that they're having issues seeing your screen. So I'm just going to stop the screen sharing real quick.
Okay.
And why don't you go ahead and share again?
Will do. How we doing now?
Yep, we can see your code. Very good. All right, let's carry on.
All right. And so I'm referencing 2 different icons. There's a color outline and a color icon and an outline icon. You'll see those in 2 different places. And so that gets us our Teams application. Just the manifest, off we go. Now, I'm going back to Yeoman. It's downloaded all the node things that are necessary and says, thank you, have a great day. And so the next thing I want to do is create this Teams application, right? It's just a tab. What the tab does at the moment is not necessarily relevant. I want to do this introductory thing here, right? So I'm going to look at the first thing I want to do is the gulp manifest command. The gulp manifest command, we'll go through and look at that manifest file, run some basic validation on it, and then, excuse me, we're going to wait. So again, it made sure it generated the manifest, made sure everything's going on here. What it ended up doing is it actually updated this host name with or it will update it with this tunnel that I'm about to run, this ngrok, and then it actually created a zip file that has the manifest in it. So if I go back now to the folder and I take a look at the package folder, you'll see here's a zip file that has my thing. This is what I provide. I upload the zip file to Microsoft Teams, right? So let me run this. Gulp serve will go through. And gulp serve is going to do, again, similar to what we see in SharePoint. You're going to see it's going to do transpile from TypeScript to JavaScript. It's going to run Webpack. It's going to actually go through and start the web service and host this page for us. And again, I get my package file. So we'll let that run. While that's running, I'm going to switch over to Teams. I've logged into Teams at the moment. I'm not an administrator in this Teams app. That reminds me, I do want to cover some introductory stuff here. So let me go to portal.office.com. I'm going to log in as a tenant admin because there are some things I need to do there. If I go back to I'm going to log in as a domain administrator in here to show this to you because, again, this is Teams setup stuff that I have to do in order to be able to do some of this Teams app development. Yeah, rainbows, yay. Okay, so I'm going to go into administration, and this is all the steps are documented in that GitHub repo I talked about. But when I come into the settings and go into services and add-ins, and then Microsoft Teams, some things have moved to the new Teams experience, not everything yet, but if I click out apps and expand this thing here, you'll see there's a bunch of apps that are allowed to be used, but further down here is the important bit right here. External apps can be loaded, yes. Side loading of external apps needs to be turned on. If this is not turned on, there's no way for you to add an app to your Teams tenant unless you go through the Microsoft Store. And we're not going to go through the Microsoft Store because we're still developing it. So you want to make sure this is enabled. Once that is enabled, if I am a team owner, which Megan is a team owner in sales and marketing, when I click on the apps tab down here at the bottom, it'll say upload a custom app. That is what I need to do the side loading. And when I click on that, it's going to then prompt me for the zip file. So I'll go into my folder, into the package, and Teams App 1, and it should load that. I get my little copper, and then eventually it's going to show Teams App 1, and this is the icon that we're shown here. And now, because this created a tab, if I click on this, it'll say, hey, this app is going to want to have a tab at the top of a channel. It's a configurable tab, which is a channel scoped service. And when I click open, it'll say, okay, you told me you want to add it. I am in the sales and marketing team. What channel should get this, and I can choose the general channel. And when I click setup, I now get the configuration experience for the tab. Behind the scenes, this should be running against, as you can see here, it didn't finish the linting process, so we'll have to figure out what's going on with my gulp at the moment. But that's the concept around it. Again, this is just, we're getting you started. We're going to just show the information that we would have in a tab, because I'm saying I have Microsoft Teams application. The first thing I want is a tab, right? And so let me cancel this and try to get that to restart. Again, this is the scaffolded app doesn't do much. It really just says, you know, hello world. You type in some value, so there's not a lot to see there. I'm not going to worry too much that it didn't work. But what I am going to do is at least cover what is included in this application. And so under source app is the information. A couple things that you'll want to know about, but you have to do anything with. Server.ts is the node-based web server that's serving this page on the local machine. Teams app components is just a declaration file that's needed to get the Teams goodness, right? I end up with some files in web folder. These are HTML files for the typical front matter stuff, if you will, in terms of use, and a privacy page and a home page, which we never really see the home page. And then I have a configuration page, an index page, and a remove page. The idea around configurable tabs is I tell Microsoft Teams, hey, I have a configurable tab, and when the tab is loaded, I want you to show the configuration experience. If I go back to the manifest, you'll notice in this configurable tab, you'll notice that the configuration URL is this config.html page. And then I provide my configuration experience, and when I'm all done with my configuration experience, I tell Microsoft Teams, here is the actual page that you should see at runtime, if you will. So if I look at config.html, you'll notice there's not much here. Now, I don't know if this is how every web developer works. I just know this is the way the Yeoman generator creates files. It has a bare bones HTML file, and it injects CSS into this location of the file, and it injects JavaScript into this location in the file. And that all happens as part of the gulp test that was created for me. That's what this thing is trying to do in the background here, where it's doing the inject and the academy. Why it's not running, I don't know. Something's changed in there, but we'll fix that later. All the meat and potatoes of what's happening is in the scripts file. In the scripts file, under my Teams, you'll notice I have a config.tsx file, and this is a React. Okay, Eric, I'm seeing the poll. Do I just want to do it later? Yeah, okay. Are you still seeing my screen, or is the poll in the way still?
No, you're good for me.
Okay. All right, so I've got my HTML page, which is going to load the compiled TypeScript.tsx, and so this is stuff that you would be familiar if you've used a SharePoint framework. We have a bunch of stuff we're importing from the Microsoft Teams UI components. We import the base team component, and then we have our typical React component where we're doing it when the component will mount. We're going to make the very important call, let's say Microsoft Teams.initialize. Microsoft Teams is an object that's imported as, this is actually the JavaScript SDK that gets imported as part of React. And you have to initialize that, which provides your context. And you can see here the context is saying I have a context entity. An entity is something I give to Teams. They store it when the page loads, it gives it back to me. And so all this is really doing is wiring that up. And then the key thing that happens here is when the save button is clicked, I'm going to tell Teams, I'm going to set the settings of this tab, and I'm saying the content URL is this tab page, right? So remember we said in the manifest, I say, here's my configuration. At runtime, when I click save, I'm going to say, here's what the content URL is, and then that would be the information that the users would see, whatever's on this page. And conversely, there's a one to remove it. I can invoke the remove URL. So that's in general how I'm going to create a tab. What actually goes on the tab is completely up to you. Again, I would say you want it to be something relevant, right? If I have a tab in a channel, the channel has members, which are a bunch of humans. Those humans are doing something. The content of your tab should help them do what their job is. So if their job is to do accounts payable, perhaps maybe the tab should have information about open invoices that need to get paid or checks that need to be written, something like that, right? Make sure it's relevant. It doesn't make sense to have just a tab that does nothing or random stuff. That's why I'm not so sure you want to take all of your SharePoint web parts and show them in Teams, because if you have a SharePoint web part that's doing news and announcements, if I'm in accounts payable, maybe I don't care about that right now, right? Put that in some other team where I can go to SharePoint. So think that through when you're building your stuff. Okay, so I can't show you how the tab works. So what I'm going to do instead is do a little quick pivot here. And in case anyone hasn't learned yet, there is another app that will help us do a similar thing called the App Studio. You just search for Studio here. And if I look at the App Studio, this is an app written by Microsoft that runs in a personal scope. And when I'm in this personal scope, I can build a manifest myself using just a user interface here. So I'm going to create a quick UI real fast and generate this. But I just want to show you how a tab would work. So we need to have something here. And they check to make sure you don't use the same value for short and long. So we want to make sure we change that. Oh, that's going to have to be, that's not right, but that's okay. And when I get down into the tab, I can then specify that I have a tab, right? And when I put in the tab here again, I specify its scope that I can put it in. I'm going to put it in a team, and I can, again, this is the SharePoint things. We'll leave that for now. But when I do this, and part of the App Studio capabilities that I can then real quick test and distribute this, and I click install right away, and it will. I need a URL. Oh, you're killing me. Go back to the App Studio and open my app. It didn't like my URL that I put somewhere. This one, for lack of fun. Okay, it's your property, Microsoft. You should know that it's
That's not a good URL, Paul.
There we go. In my head, it was. All right, so let's try this again. Again, I just want to show you what a tab, for those who haven't seen it, I'm going to add this to my sales and marketing team and install in the general channel. So when I click setup, and now you'll see here's my configurable tab. The URL that I typed in is what gets shown in the configuration experience, right? So again, I'm not sure what's going on with the Yeoman generator. The fact that it took forever to download when I first started it worries me that there was a change that isn't working. But the goal is to introduce you, not necessarily to cover it all. So we're just going to move on at the moment. And so how do we create a Teams app? I kind of touched on this already, but there's 3 simple steps. You develop your stuff, right? You integrate it with Teams, and then you deploy it. It's easy, right? We've done this stuff crazy. But now developing stuff, again, this is not something that's specific to Microsoft Teams. We create a web page using HTML and JavaScript or whatever technology we want. .NET is a valid option. Anything you can host on the web will work as you can develop a tab. If you're developing a bot, there's an SDK for .NET, there's an SDK for Node. You can do anything. A bot is really just a web service that responds to messages. So you can do this development in whatever capability, whatever technology is comfortable for you and your team. That's what we find is the beauty. I don't have to go teach developers all this stuff. I don't have to go learn the SharePoint SDK. I don't have to go learn SPFX libraries that are everywhere to interact with SharePoint, because Teams lets me send messages as a bot or open a tab as an iframe. I don't have to necessarily work with the Teams application to do something. It's really just there to serve my services for me. So I can do that however is comfortable and productive for my development team. I then integrate it with Microsoft Teams, and this is where a little bit you have to understand what's going on. When the Teams SDK, and I showed you it was one line. I just say Microsoft Teams.initialize, and now I'm good to go. Now, if I want to store state in a team that I can then refer to later, then I might have to call the set settings or get settings, but that's not a lot to learn, right? It's really lightweight JavaScript library that helps me get data into and out of Microsoft Teams. For example, you can set a dark mode in Teams, and maybe you want your tab to render a dark mode, so you want to be able to interface with them. Easy enough to do. If you're writing a bot, you don't have to interface with Teams. You interface with the Bot Builder SDK that comes with the bot framework. And as we showed you already, I just need to write a manifest that describes my services, give it an icon, preferably a prettier one than what I had. You zip it up, and then you upload that. I forgot to show you upload. Let me go to the catalog real quick. I was in sales and marketing, and I went into the tabs list of sales and marketing, and I clicked upload a custom tab. Okay, by the way, this is the one I created in the Yeoman generator. This is the one that the App Studio created for me. In addition, I can come over to this thing here. When I click more apps, I can see this view here, right? Now, because I'm logged in as Megan is a Teams administrator. That's a role that Megan has. There is an option here to upload a custom app, right? And I can upload for me or my teams. That me or my team shows up because I went to the Teams administration or Office 365 administration and said allow side loading. That's why it says me or my teams. Upload for Contoso is because Megan is a Teams administrator in this tenant. And if Megan does upload for Contoso, we get the same concept here. I upload the zip file, and once that's done, you'll notice right here in the middle of the list, it now has my organization name. This is my tenant app catalog. And now all of my users can click on Contoso or whatever your company name is and see apps that were written or deployed by your tenant administrators. And so obviously deploying your Teams app is really pretty straightforward. And yes, there's an API in Microsoft Graph to do that. Some of it's in the beta still, so it's not 100% there yet, but the ability to publish apps into the app catalog and or deploy them into a specific team is available through Microsoft Graph. So if you're doing some automated provisioning stuff, you can certainly tie that into your process. So now let's transition over to a bot real quick, right? We talked about, again, we have just an app, it's an iframe or it's a bot, and it's really just a thin manifest. But obviously, we want to do a little bit more of that. So let's talk about what that entails here, right? Developing a bot is easy, 3 steps, right? It's been 3 steps since the dawn of SharePoint. You just write some code and you package it and deploy it and you're off on your way. But here's where we're going to take a step back, or stop. When I'm writing a web page or a SharePoint web part, obviously it's kind of dictated by the business process, right? There's a business rule, there's some function that has to happen, there's machines that demand, whatever. There's some external forces deciding what this should do. When I write a bot, it's designed, its purpose in life is to interact with humans. And you aren't going to get every human in your organization to go along with what you say, right? Well, maybe you can if you work for yourself, but otherwise you have to understand that it's not that I'm just dictating what has to happen here. For a bot to be productive, I need to be able to interact with the humans and be responsive and understand what they're doing. And so this is Microsoft's tips to say, by the way, you should always respond to event. If you don't understand, say you don't understand, but you can't, if there's an exception that happens in your code, you got to at least tell them something went wrong, here's how I can report it. Because if the bot never answers, people don't use it. And if people aren't using it, why did I write the code, right? And then again, if they ask a question, you should understand that it's a question and be able to respond to their question, right? Now, there's some tools that Microsoft offers around language understanding and Q&A Maker, the Lewis service, cognitive services in Azure, a bunch of things, none of which are free, but they're way outside of the scope on introductory to Teams. So, but there are some capability that you should certainly be researching, understand how do I want to do an effective bot. Building my bot, again, I can do .NET, I can do Node, as you'd expect. And then there's one little other wrinkle when I deploy a bot is, number one, I need to deploy it in with the Azure Bot Service first, and then I can update my manifest and deploy my manifest in Teams. So there's a little bit different steps there that you have to do for deploying your bot. One of the key things that Microsoft recommends is that you have a personality and you stay consistent, right? So perhaps it's just robotic, I don't understand, here's results, or maybe you want to get something a little bit more creative. Doesn't matter. The point is stick to it. Have some type of recognizable personality and be consistent. And this becomes tough over time, right? As more developers on and off and bots get to be more and more capability, you want to make sure, right? If you talk to someone, you generally understand, right? When I talk to Eric, I hear that all y'all, and oh yeah, okay, that's the guy in the South, right? So there's that inherent understanding of what's going on. And I won't say the things he tells about me. I'll let him do that himself. But you want your bot to have a very similar capability, right? You want your users to understand your bot and recognize your bot and know that that's who they're conversing with. Or conversely, if I forget to mention the bot and I type something and I don't get a response, or a human comes back and says, "What are you talking about?" Oh, that's not what I want. So the little cues like that are important when I'm doing with a bot. So make sure you have a personality that makes sense. When I write a bot, I mentioned this at the beginning, all I'm building is a web service. A message comes in and I provide a response. That message is part of an activity, and the activity is a rich payload of things. And so you'll want to understand what these properties are, these things are, so that you can interact with them. Primarily, I get a message. It can be plain text, it can be an attachment, right? And there's also a payload that says this is the entities that are involved. And in other words, who is the user that's sending me information, or what channel is this conversation happening in? So you'll want to inspect the activity object that comes in as your response to understand what to do next. Now, obviously, conversations can have more than one step. Classic example, here's a new bot. I say, "What's your name?" "My name is Paul." "What's your favorite hockey team?" "The Blackhawks are the best hockey team ever." "Why would you even bother to ask?" Right? I have these answers that go into this concept of what's going on. So your bot needs to understand this conversation. And so you want to use what they call the dialogue framework to help manage that. And so that's a way for you to then you can simply write some code that says, I want you to prompt for the name. And whenever you need to know someone's name, you can just say, "Show the prompt for name." And the library will handle a lot of that stuff for us. And so you want to understand the dialogue framework that comes with the Bot Framework SDK. And then you're going to need to store state. If a user has given you some preferences, "My name is Paul," then next time I interact, you could say, "Hello, Paul." Or you shouldn't ask me my name a second time because you know who I am. Conversely, if I am going to have a tab, and let's say that I have a bunch of maintenance people on a shop floor, right? And they may have a different tab for each machine on the floor, right? When I configure this tab for machine number 6, you should remember that for me, right? You have to store the state. And so when I'm working with the Bot Framework, they have classes for state, and they provide a memory state object, but memory state just basically means your web server state memory. That's not long term. So you're going to have to do that. And every example is going to be Cosmos DB, which is one of the biggest money makers I think Azure has, because it's not cheap. So understand what you're doing. You don't have to use Azure Cosmos DB. You can use anything that will store data in your web service or on your network, but you have to have some type of state and some type of long-term storage to understand what's going on there. State has, in a bot, state has, again, your 3 different scopes, if you will. The user, that's the same state available no matter where I see that user. A conversation, which is no matter every thread in the conversation. And private means the state for each user in the conversation. And you can decide what's appropriate. Do you want to store information, right? Again, you can read more about that. Conversations have the 2 scopes that we saw in tabs, one-on-one or channel, right? There's a channel conversation, there's a one-on-one. There's also what they call a group chat, which is would be on the right-hand side of this slide. It's a one-to-many conversation, if you will. The key difference from an end user perspective is I have to mention the bot in order for the message to come in, right? So it's a key thing. In a one-on-one conversation, by definition, it's a human in the bot. So everything the human types is sent to the bot. In a channel, everything the human types is sent to the channel, not to the bot. The only reason the bot sees it is if it's @mentioned. So a common misconception is that I put a bot in a channel, I can see all the messages that come in. Nope. You only see messages that which you are @mentioned. The bot is @mentioned. Now, if you want to read messages in a channel, Microsoft Graph has the ability to do that. There is no app-only access to messages in a channel. So you have to have a user context. So you're only going to see messages that are relevant or with a certain user scope. So make sure you understand that when you're planning out your application. The text that we can send back and forth, you can see here the bot can send information, text, rich text. Well, they call it rich text, but it's basically Markdown, which is really just bold and italics and basic stuff, nothing fancy. You can send a picture as part of a card. Cards are the way to go. There's a hero card, a thumbnail card, a connector card. You're not going to use any of those. You're going to use adaptive cards. Again, there's a whole module on that in the training content repo about using adaptive cards. And obviously, you can do the emoji type keys as well, right? Here's cards. A card is from the bot to a human. If you need to send information to the human, you might want to use a card. And when I was talking earlier about I want to do a Azure DevOps bug conversation, I can have a card that's posted to the channel into the conversation for all the humans to see that would show information about that. And the thumbnail is a perfect one like this. It's got a little image, I got a title and some text and buttons. And usually the button is see more or view more or whatever. It's a great way for the bot to get information in front of my users, but I'm not distracting them, right? Earlier in the talk, Chris mentioned we had this notification capability that everyone wants to turn off, right? We don't want to be spamming our users, but we want to get information that's relevant to them. So a thumbnail card or even a hero card is a good way to do that.
Hey, Paul, your screen stopped again. Don't transition that slide. Let me stop you and go ahead and share again.
All righty. And it should be a slide with three cards on it: adaptive card, hero card, thumbnail card.
There we go. Got it. Carry on.
Okay. All right. So in the slide deck, there's a couple other cards here as well that you can refer to. Oops, where'd my mouse go? There we go. Other cards that come with the bot framework. Again, you're not going to necessarily do that. I would point out that the list or list collection is relevant because if I do a search of things, let's say I want the bot to search for the machines on my shop floor, I may want to show a list of the machines that match their search criteria. And I can do that in a vertical layout or a carousel, and you can choose which you want to do. Again, if you're like me and you're graphically challenged and you simply say, here's 6 things, show it in a carousel, Microsoft Teams will render the first one with the arrows left and right, and they handle all the interactions, and I don't have to do any of that work. It's a sweet thing, so certainly worthwhile. Now, where a bot becomes more helpful than, okay, so initially people say, well, I want to write a bot, and I'm going to let people look up stuff, or I'm going to do the Q&A maker bot, and that means I can type a question and get an answer. Well, I could do search, right? I could go to Bing or Google and find out that information as well. How is the bot really helpful to me as opposed to just searching for information? And that would be where actions come into play. I'm going to go back a slide or two, and you can look at all 3 of these cards here have buttons on them. And when the button is clicked, it invokes an action. The action that I can invoke can be of these different types. I can have it open a URL in the browser. I can have it send a message back to the channel, and so everyone in the conversation can see the message. I can do the IM back. I got those backwards, I'm sorry. I can do an IM back, which means here everyone sees the message. I click a button and then maybe it's translated into the word that says, you know, open or read more. Or I can do message back, which is a direct back channel message to my bot. So again, it's an HTTP post back to my bot based on the user's choice. And now I can do something. So if the shop floor machine number 6 breaks and you have some monitoring software that then is going to say, oh, I have a webhook, my bot can say, oh, something broke on number 6, I can post a message in number 6, right? And then Paul clicks on the button, says, I've got it. Now that button click can go back and update my system, say, hey, at 3 o'clock on the 16th, Paul said he's going to fix machine number 6. So now you can track that. So now there's the ability for, if you think about the human's job is to say something broke, I need to fix it, but I don't have to just fix it, I have to log it, right? Those who travel have seen the mechanic on the airplane with the 18-page form that the pilot has to sign before we can leave. Imagine if that was a single button click. Now there's a productivity enhancement that teams and bots can bring to our humans who are trying to do their job. So keep those kinds of things in mind as you're going through. The last type of event I want to cover is events, and this is things that you'd want to know. This kind of helps the infrastructure about your bot interacting with the service. When a new team member is added, you are notified who that team member is, right? Or when they're removed. When a channel is added to a team, you can notify that, right? And you can see these on here. The key thing about this, as of today, in mid-July 2019, I can only send a message to a user if I've seen them before. And I only see them if I get the team member added event. And so I get their unique ID. Microsoft Teams assigns an ID to the human. It's different than what Azure Active Directory has. And so you need to capture that ID when a member is added to a team so that you can then reach out to them later if necessary. Now, there is work underway to improve the proactive messaging capability, but right now, that's the way you have to do it. So while it seems like, well, I don't care who's in the team, but maybe you do if you ever want to then interact with those users later, right? When I want to test the bot, I have a couple different choices. I can use the bot registration portal, I can use the bot framework emulator, or I can use live teams with the ngrok tunnel. And so I use the ngrok tunnel, which I forgot to talk about in the previous bit. We'll show that next. Other people have done the bot framework emulator. I prefer to just run the web service, do the ngrok tunnel, and then use the Teams application directly. Primarily because there's things that Teams does that the bot framework doesn't do, or Teams does them differently. So if your goal is to have a bot that works with Facebook and Slack and Teams, the bot framework emulator is probably the way to go. If you're writing a bot for Teams, why not test it in Teams, okay? And so let's go through and see put those on there. Okay, so it's a little bit past the top of the hour, so we're still okay on time. Yes, I can go into this demo.
Yeah, go for it, man. Carry on.
All right. So what I'm going to do right now is open up the developer prompt. I don't need to do the developer prompt necessarily, but that's what I like to do. So I want to do, I should open the browser. So what I like to do first when I'm testing all this stuff is that there's a utility called ngrok, ngrok.io, well, is the website I will go to. And ngrok is an HTTP tunnel. When I'm going to be writing a bot in the Azure Bot Service, obviously Azure Bot Service is in the cloud, and I want messages that are sent to my bot to be routed to me. I'm writing the code on my local laptop. I don't want to publish this until it's ready. And so I can run this ngrok utility, which will then create a publicly accessible URL, and then any request to that URL will get routed back to my local machine. And so I've already downloaded this, and I'm going to go in here, and I'm going to go to my main folder here. I think it's in here, right? Yep. And so if I run ngrok, whoops. I want to show that next. Let me go to Visual Studio, and I'm going to do a new Echo bot in the Bot Builder framework. Again, all these steps are in the links that I have at the end, or if you go to github.com/office-dev in training, then you will see there's step-by-step instructions and all these links on how to get all this stuff, right? So let me real quick go into my DFW folder because I will share the stuff later. And okay, in there, I'm going to create bot application 1. It's a good idea. We'll click OK. Now, as I mentioned, there's a new version of the bot framework that came out of build version 4. I think it's up to 4.5 now, I think it is. The Microsoft Teams SDK for bots is still built on version 3. That any day now they're going to release it. The stuff I'm doing here is still the old version here. So I have .NET Framework plus the bot SDK version 3. And so now I have a simple bot, right? And if I look at a bot, I basically get a controller with the messages controller, and anytime a message is sent in, it comes into this controller, and all this is going to do is get the information that the user sent and echo it back to them. But now, before I can do this, I need to connect it to the internet. So I do that in a couple of different ways. First thing I can do is go into this App Studio that we saw before, and if you, on the left hand, in the manifest editor, I can choose, if I go into my bot, there is going to be this bot here. And this will tell you you have to set up your bot. And so we'll give this a name, the DFWUG bot. That's for a good name. And I'm not going to do anything. I'll choose all of this stuff here. I click create the bot. And this will go off and register my bot with the Azure Bot Service for me. Now, what that really means is that it's connected up to dev.botframework.com/bots. And if I sign in here with that same administrator account, it should find it. I'm logged in as Megan, that's why. So I'll show you the web interface as well. If I click on create right here, first thing it's going to do, is, this is common, right? I go to dev.botframework.com. It says, oh, this is an Azure thing. It redirects you to Azure. In order to do this, you need to have an Azure subscription, which means you have to have a credit card. You don't have to spend money, but you have to have a credit card for it to work. So that's not what we want as well. So let me go, if I go into bots/new, this shortcut used to work. So again, if you do bots/new, and again, the step-by-step instructions that are in the training content repo has this URL for you, so you can get and do this without having to create an Azure subscription. And now I can give this a name, right, and a handle, testing. I need something unique. Again, I'm going to just put a bunch of junk in here. And then I need to have this, what we call a messaging endpoint. So this is where this tunnel comes in. I want to show you how these pieces get connected. I'm going to go back to Visual Studio. And if I look at this application, again, it's a web API. Under web, you'll notice it has a URL, 3978. And so I go into the ngrok, and I say I want an HTTP tunnel on 3978. And because it's IIS, I need to have a local host. I'm sorry, a host header, which is local, oh, not a colon, local host header equals localhost 3978. And so what this command is saying, hey, ngrok, anything that comes into you, I want you to redirect to this local host on port 3978. And what this will end up building is a URL right here, that this is publicly accessible. And if you were to go to the internet and type in this page, you're going to end up with server requests coming into my laptop. Now I don't have a web, nothing running here, so you'll get a 500 error, but I could do that. But the key thing is that when I go back to the bot framework, I can put this in here, and I can then do the URL to that controller. Okay, I know that it's API messages, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to show this. I'm going to click Start in the project real quick, and the home page that the Visual Studio template gives us has the same information for us. So you'll notice it's at 3978, and then eventually it'll come up with that API messages, right? Now, here it is, API messages, right? But now, not everything is working just yet. There's still more pieces to the puzzle. And I know this is a lot, but again, the steps are followed in there. But my bot needs to communicate with the bot service, and I only have to do that because I have app registration. And you'll notice I clicked on this, and now I end up with my Azure app registration. Azure Active Directory I can get without a credit card, so this works out pretty well. So let's create a new one real quick, and we're going to call this the DFW sample, and we want it in Contoso, which is good. I'm going to click register. All I really need here is the ID and the secret, so I'm going to grab the ID, and I'll go back to here, and in web config, I need that, and I need a secret. So let's go back here, and we'll do a secret. And I copy that and paste that in here. And we'll start that up again. Now I'm going to return back to, where did I put that? That was in here. All right, so let me go back to my bots. Oh, you're killing me. It's not provision, it's bots. It's still not finding my bot. All right, we're going to have to create it. All right, so let me do new. We're going to do with a new set of credentials here, but that's okay. So we're going here, DFW sample. I forgot that already, so let me go back and copy. API messages. Create this path. Oh, I've got that. Okay, so while I'm here, I can put that in here. So I can put the app ID from, I can use the same one I had there. So I'm going to grab that and put that in there. And I'm not going to turn on App Insights. I'm going to click the services and click register. So now I've got an application registered with Azure Active Directory. I have an app, the same app is registered as a bot with the bot framework, right? So now I have this bot with the bot framework. The next step is to say, I want it to configure to talk to Teams. So I need to click on the Teams icon, and this is really nothing to do here except to say, yeah, I understand the Microsoft Teams has a different terms of service than the bot framework does. And now I've connected this bot at the Azure Bot Service to Microsoft Teams in general, just Microsoft Teams, right? Now that I've done that, I run the right-hand side here. I can click this test, and now this lets me then test this using just the web interface. I haven't written any code yet. I just want to make sure things are working. I've got my tunnel working, so you'll notice, hey, there's already been something that comes in, right? Something's happening already. If I come in here and I type in hello, it couldn't send. Something happened, but it's still not working. And if I look over here now, you'll see that it's telling me there was an internal service error. And that generally means, oh, I'm not sure this is running, right? Although it's running now, but let me stop and restart this because the values probably don't match. Oh, this has to change, the bot ID. So if I come back to settings and I copy that, and we put that there, and let's run this again. So what we're trying, again, all we're doing here is we're configuring something with the bot service. We're then connecting it to Microsoft Teams, and I'm just checking to make sure that the conversations are working, right? All right, so that's running, that's good. What I like to do next is go to the localhost 4040, and this is a web interface to the ngrok tool, so you can see what's happening here. We like this because look at this. This is the activity that was sent to my bot. Remember I said how you get this messaging activity? Well, there it is. It's a message, and it said hello, right? So I can see all the stuff that's working, and I can clear out old ones. So now let's go back to the web page here, and we'll retry this. And we still couldn't send, and now I'm still getting the error. And what am I missing here?
I think you had a trailing space on your Visual Studio for the app name or ID.
Okay, thank you for whoever that was. And fourth time's the charm, so we'll come back to Chrome and try this again. And we're still having an error. All right, so what's my error? I'll go back to 4040. And the response, if I scroll down, I can see the response. I have to just read this in stack trace. So my credentials are still not working. Something's not right. So I have to, all right. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time troubleshooting that for now. The idea, of course, is that I build this app here. And I want to show you real quick here in the Visual Studio what this project is doing. And I apologize for this not working, but I promise that if I followed all the steps in the lab, it would work, but I'm just kind of flying solo here. Here's my web controller that gets the message. Now, if you notice, the post comes in, the activity thing that we saw in ngrok comes in as it's parsed into an activity. And you can see here it's checking to see if this is a message, then I want to use a dialogue to handle it. We talked before about dialogues. And if I look at the dialogue, all this dialogue is really doing is saying when a message is received, I want you to calculate the length of it. And then it replies back just with the same text that you gave me, plus it was X number of characters, right? Again, a simple demonstration. But it shows us that our controller is going to inspect the activity that comes in, and depending on the activity, I'm going to act on it. If it's not a message, then a human didn't type something, maybe one of those events happen, and that's where we get this handle system message activity. And if I look down in here, you can see perhaps the activity type was user deleted or a conversation update. A conversation update is a new users added to the team. And so you can see I can, by inspecting different values, I can do information as necessary. Now, again, this is a stubbed out code, but again, we're just showing you this is the idea that we can act on what they show using this framework, right? And the last thing I want to cover is there is .bot file, and the .bot file is what they call the bot definition file, and this is what I can use with the bot emulator. If you download the bot emulator, you can do file open, and you point it at this BOT file, and again, it reads that same information, right? So I would put in my app ID and the app password here, and then in theory, everything should just work, right? Now, what I'm going to do real quick here, just to try to get, what's broken is the configuration, but fortunately I have this configuration here for me, right? So I'm going to create a new app password here, and I'm going to copy that. What I'm going to do now is this bot that's generated by the App Studio, I'm going to put that into, instead of the one I used on the website, I'm going to put that information in here, and we'll see if we can get it to work that way. So that was the password that the App Studio created. This is the app ID. I'm going to copy that real quick. And then the messaging endpoint here is going to be this value. I know there's extra spaces there, but we'll fix that. So get rid of that, /API messages. And we don't have the menu, so let me scroll down and test and distribute this. And so now I'm going to be adding to a team or a chat. This is in the sales and marketing. And now you'll notice it has the tab icon here, but because I've added a new capability, it shows up in there. All right. So it's redeploying that app. If I click setup here, it should take me to the sales and marketing. And you'll notice here, Megan Bowen has added ASDF to the team. That's the bot that I just created here, right? And so I'm going to say hello, and we'll see how we do here. Yeah, it's still not working, and I'm going to blame that on Paul Fat Fingering, so I apologize for that. And so that's the last thing I want to cover is more on creating a tab. And so I'm 0 for 2 on demo, so I'm not going to do another demo for you, but I just want to get this content out here to go over in deep about what you can do in a tab. And we talked before about how we can do a tab configuration. And so you get a configuration screen, and then you click save, and then you can render as noted on that. The next thing that people need to know is we talked a little bit before about the state or the context. And so the context of the web page, right? So before I showed the bot, and I'm going to go back real quick to the ngrok window so you can see that was I closed already. So let me just open that up. Localhost 4040. When the messages are being sent to my bot, you'll notice I know that it's from the web chat, and I have a conversation ID. And if I was in Microsoft Teams, I'd have this channel data would have the team ID and the channel ID, that context of the bot being executed. Well, if I'm in a tab, I might want the same information. When a user is configuring a tab or it's running at runtime, I want to know information about what team is the app running in. So this information is available either as a URL placeholder or through the get context method. So that's the context that you're currently running. Now, if you are using SharePoint Framework web parts, remember you can do you get the SharePoint context when you're running in SharePoint. When you're running in Teams, this is the thing that you get. So these are the properties that you would get when you say get context in a SharePoint web part and it's being hosted in Microsoft Teams. This is the information that you're going to be getting back. Okay, and then obviously the authentication section is part of the full day workshop on Teams. But in general, there's a key thing you have to understand when you're doing authentication in a tab. The first thing is that if I'm going to be calling Microsoft Graph or anything secured by Azure Active Directory, Azure AD will not issue a token to a web page unless it's the topmost window of the browser. And as we said at the very beginning, Microsoft Teams hosts an iframe, and your tab runs in the iframe. So you are not the topmost thing. So you can't get a token, period. The way this works is I make a call to the Teams SDK, this authenticate method, and I pass in the URL that my app is expecting for token acquisition. Again, if you're doing implicit flow, all that stuff still applies. It's just that I need to provide that controller or page that's handling the authentication to the Microsoft Teams application, and they will render a pop-up That is the topmost window, and that'll do my code to get token acquisition. And then when in my page, this pop-up page, I have the Teams SDK, and I say notify success, and then that will close the dialog, right? And as you notice at the bottom of this slide, I call notify success, and I pass in the token that I received. And then what ends up happening is the Microsoft Teams SDK will end up calling my success callback with the parameter that is the token, and I can go on and do that. That code is available. I'll get you the URL on that as well. So again, I'm not going to do that because number one, I don't think it's going to work, and number two, it's a long time. So I'm going to leave that open for the moment while I go to this other page to show you how to get all this information. And again, this is all. So if you go to this link, scon.link/dfwspug, which is also in the chat window, someone posted that for me as well, that will get you to my resources page that has all these links as well. And so let me bring this window down. And now you should see a browser. This is the Office Dev repository for training content. If I go to the root at training content, you'll see it's all the applications, but we were in Teams. And what I did today was most of Module 4. But you'll see there's all the breakdown. And if I go into each individual module, there's a lab.md file, and this is all the steps, right? And so if you go into number 3 and you go through register an app and add SDK, here is the actual code that you're going to want to call to get the token. If I go down in here, here is my admin consent file. Here it is, right? There's the JavaScript that you would use to get a token or get admin consent on a token. And this is the one here. And so it's all there. I promise it works. I just feel bad that it wasn't working today. I was getting errors with my ngrok stuff in the bot framework, so I apologize for that. But all the steps are there. This was working when it was last published, which would have been in the beginning of the last quarter, so it would have been on June 12th. So unless things have changed in the last month, which is entirely possible in the service, but the stuff is pretty good. So that's my big fancy whirlwind introductory Microsoft Teams stuff. And now I'm happy to cover any questions that have come up and go from there.
Wow, Paul, that was a lot of content in an hour and change. Good.
Yeah, and which is why it didn't work, right? If I make the demos work slowly, we're talking 2 hours plus. So I apologize for not working demos, but it's all there. But yeah, thanks. This is a.
So first question will be: is this? You mentioned that this is in a training sort of format with labs and stuff. How do they access the video content and the labs so they can work through this?
So again, oops, where did my let me minimize this. If I go to this repo again, github.com/officedev/training content, and when I get in here for module 4 for Teams, you can see here this goes through, and each one has record. Oh, this isn't the lab. I'm sorry, the README. So if I go to each individual module, you'll notice here in the README, there's a link to the lab manual. There's the demos. This has been recorded, right? A YouTube channel. So it's all here as well. And again, these demos, if you go into the demos folder, which is what we get in here, this is actual working code. There's some steps you have to do. So for example, if you want to run this Teams bot, your bot needs to be registered with the service. So you still have to do some manual setups with the bot, but the actual working code is all set in here. So it's all good to go.
And that was github.com/officedev/training content?
Yes.
Perfect. I posted that into the chat, so if anyone is looking for that information on where to go and get more data. And of course, we will post this recording just so people understand the process flow here. It takes a few days for it to render everything, and then I have to go in and check it and scrub it up and whatnot. So it does take a little time for us to get the recording out. So look for that in the next week or so. We'll be able to push this recording out to you so that you have all this content. You can get some of the preliminary links in our handout section. Go to shaefline.net and look for that DFW Spug post that has all that, a bunch of links that he posted there as well. So,
and again, I'm happy if you get stuck, you have questions, you can reach out to me either email or on Twitter. That's fine as well. I'm happy to help you work through this stuff. And if you want a topic in more depth on the podcast, I'm happy to take those feedback as well. So there's something that you want to hear more, you want more Texas, we can certainly work on that as well. So thanks for having me. And again, I want to make sure people are unstuck. So if you get stuck, feel free to shoot me an email or reach out on Twitter.
So he's at Paul Schaefline on the Twitters, so you can feel free to ping him on there. Thank you, everyone, for sticking with us. So this one we ran at about an hour and a half, and I noticed we lost about half of the audience or so, right around the hour or so mark. But we want to make sure, because we don't have the breakout format anymore, unfortunately, we're hoping that that's something they'll add to this tooling going forward. We're trying to bring you as much content as we possibly can in our weekly session. So please do feel free to give us some feedback if you are okay with sticking around. It looks like quite a few of you did, and thank you all for hanging out with us for an hour and a half. And we're happy to go a little longer if y'all are happy to go a little longer. So please, I'll post a poll on that next time. Feel free to reach out to us on that. You can reach us on Facebook. You should, if you're following me on Facebook or any of our hosts, you can get to our group on there. Just hunt up DFW SharePoint user group, and you'll find that on Facebook. Follow us there. We're on the Twitters at DFW Spug, and you can find us there and on our website at dfwsharepoint.com. So to my fellow presenters, Chris and Corey, and I know Paul's out there somewhere, thank you all so much for joining us this month, and a huge round of applause, yay, for Paul Schaefline, and the fastest way to introduce teams ever invented. So thank you for going through all that. That was a ton of stuff in a short period of time. Where's your next conference appearance for folks who might be interested?
Surprisingly, there is nothing scheduled. So
what?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, nothing planned at the moment. So it's going to be social media and online at the moment. But
that you know of. You may get an email.
Well,
like you did for SharePoint conference.
That's always possible. Yes, indeed. Yes. Yeah.
So, all right. Well, with that, we're going to go ahead and sign off. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this week. By the way, someone asked a question, so let me just close with this. If for everyone who was on the meeting and everyone who registered, you will get an automatic email telling you when the video is available, so you don't have to check back. But I did post earlier the link to our channel, so you can go check there on a regular basis. Look for this probably middle part of next week. Again, thanks to Paul and everyone, and we will see you all next week or next month.